I'm listening to a podcast, Black Lodge Trivia Night. I've never heard so many game aspirations in my life.
All right, welcome back to Black Lodge Trivia Night. This is Art, and once again, I am in my sex dungeon in the basement, doing another Bookhouse Boys, for reasons. That means we're down in Matt and Patrick. They are making the final arrangements for the arrivals of head of state for the upcoming World Cup. I like soccer. I like paying $400 for a train ticket on New Jersey Transit, but alas, I was not asked. So what we're going to do is we're going to get into another Bookhouse Boys and go over GDW's Dark Conspiracy. Now, the reason why, you might be like, why is he pulling this one out? If you are in the know, you'll know that I think Mongoose Publishing has acquired the rights to redo Dark Conspiracy, and I think the Kickstarter is coming out this summer. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at what Dark Conspiracy is. Dark Conspiracy is a game that holds a lot of nostalgia for me. I think here on the channel we've talked before about how, you know, if you saw my bracket of, 32 bracket, liminal horror went really far. And probably Call of Cthulhu did. I probably talked about it in some ways with Call of Cthulhu as well, where I really like these kind of horror games because you don't really know what's going to happen. Honestly, anything could happen. And for me personally, like when I encounter these kinds of stories in like a novel or a television show or a movie, there's something about me that needs it to sort of come together a bit where I don't require that quite so much in a game. It's just when you're dealing with this kind of horror, like a Call of Cthulhu or a liminal horror, you can almost argue like anything could happen in a sense. And I really enjoy trying to puzzle out like, oh my God, what's going on here? Even if the end result is there's like an oil goop monster in the bottom of a hotel, or, like for those kinds of games, I really enjoy the atmosphere. I really enjoy the mysteriousness of it. And I really enjoy the fact that because in that kind of horror, so many possibilities are on the table, you really can't predict how things are going to go. And I genuinely enjoy that in role-playing games. So the game that introduced me to those feelings was Dark Conspiracy. As a kid growing up, I mentioned the Middle-earth role-playing one, a little bit of the Satanic Scare. We weren't doing D&D. We did Middle-earth role-playing, but the one that we got into hardcore first was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I think by Palladium Books. The second game we got into was Twilight 2000, the original GDW. So, Twilight 2000, and you'll see why I'm talking about that in a second, had a couple of different versions. The first version is the one I played the most, but unbelievably, I can't remember how it works. Was it a D100? I don't really recall. The second version sort of pared down the mechanics, sort of tried to, second edition, streamlined them into like a D10 system. There was actually a 2.5 edition. I don't know if they ever called it a third edition that took those same 1D10 streamlined mechanics and made it a D20. I don't know if that was like D20 is big with like D&D 3 and the OpenGL or whatever. But anyway, so there was sort of like this D20 version of the system. Didn't really matter in the end. Systems don't matter. But it didn't really matter. Like it was still the same sort of basic ideas. They just shifted the numbers so it worked with a D20 instead of a D10. Anyway, Dark Conspiracy is derived from that second edition of Twilight 2000, the 1D10 version of it. I think Lester Smith might have even been one of the authors on Twilight 2000. I assume so. But Dark Conspiracy was the game where I first was introduced to this kind of horror. And the kind of horror where, it was really easy for me to turn my suspension of disbelief off, my brain off, whatever you want to say, and just go with it. And it was like, whoa, I didn't see that coming because, maybe on paper it made no sense whatsoever. But it was, what the story involved. And again, with RPGs, I'm a lot more willing to go with it. Dark Conspiracy, this is going to be a weird one because I've got a couple of books here. I'm not going to go through every single one because Dark Conspiracy, part of what we'll crack it open. Something very strange is going on, stranger than usual, I mean. Hell, I'm used to eco-commandos dynamiting oil refineries. I'm used to riots in the farm family relocation camps. I understand that wars, the street gangs, and the corporate security goons are fighting for the inner cities, giving you a brief overview of the setting. I can accept the steady breakup of old nations. So what you're getting is basically, but it goes through all these different things of like a radio station in Chicago is broadcasting only a single oscillating tone all day long. Whole blocks of Mexico City have been abandoned by people anyway. My contact in the Michigan Secret Service said we're being invaded, part of a centuries-old plot. I want to find out more. But before we could meet, he turned up headless in a park. And now I have this feeling I'm being followed. So in my mind, Dark Conspiracy is sort of a mix of the X-Files, cyberpunk, not quite cosmic horror, but like there are elements of that, horror. And depending on where you are in the setting, if you're in the city, it's very cyberpunky. If you're outside the city, it's very Mad Max. If there's certain areas called like, we'll get into it, Demon Grounds or something like that, it's, more horror. But, so taking a look at the table of contents, you got your basics. Do I have a character sheet? Again, I like going by a character sheet. I thought I had one. Let's start with a character sheet. So a character sheet, the way this system works is, like I said, it's a D10 system, which means you're taking your strength. I don't know if it's literally the strength plus your skill, or maybe you choose whichever one's higher. Maybe it's your strength plus your skill plus any modifiers, and that determines your target number. So you might have like an 8, 8's too high, but let's say like you have a 3 and a 4. So that makes your target number 7. You roll a D10 and you're trying to roll below, maybe equal to or below that target number. And then if you're able to clear that by a certain number, I don't know if it's 5 or 6, whatever it is, you get a critical hit. If you go over, you fail. If you go over by that 5 or 6 or whatever, it's a critical fumble. So that's the basics of the system. And if you've played old school Twilight 2000, I always felt like this was a thing where you pre-calculate like your target numbers based on range. So you didn't have to do it in the moment. Like Twilight 2000, it's got location-based damage. And again, like portions or something, like you might have like a left leg of 4, so a scratch is up to 8. So anyway, so it's, if you have 4 points of damage, it's a scratch. If you have up to 8, it might be this, so there's some formula to figure out how many hit points you have per location and what constitutes what level of damage, which, you also kind of almost sort of get like in something like Mithras. So that's the basic thing, equipment, contacts, history, stuff like that. Occupation. So character creation in this game involves, well, let's go back to the table of contents. Oh, Frank Chadwick. Yeah, development. He was definitely one of the Twilight 2000 guys. Lauren K. Weissman, also Twilight 2000. So you can see like this is got some Twilight 2000 going on. You can see the artwork. You got like the monsters, but you also got like your typical cyberpunk guy about to get eaten by said monster. Character creation in this game. There's one, I'll show you. Let me see if I can find it real quick. There's one image in here that was what hooked me on the game. And I'll see if I can find it real quick. It was just, the problem is I don't know where it is. If we come to it, we'll come to it. There was one image that I remember looking at the book and I was like, oh God, it sort of explains to me what the game was perfectly. And it's what hooked my imagination immediately. The character generation overview is basically you select a background, you determine your attributes. It's a life path system, much like Twilight 2000. A lot of GDW games have life path systems. Obviously, GDW is the publisher of Traveller, and that's famous for its life path system. So that this game has one of those, and it's very good. They're always, I think, a lot of fun. A life path system. It means that creating a character is more work, and when a character creation system is more work, it means you hope that it's not a super deadly game because it's not easy to just run and like a Morkborg just right back into it. But yeah, as far as like, spending experience points, et cetera, they have character creation, but you can sort of see like strength with melee combat of 2. So you probably have like a 6 base for that. So you're trying to roll below that, but everything else might be a 4. But you can see the careers. You can do education paths, undergraduate, graduate, law school, military academy, technical school, astronaut, athlete, attorney. And again, you take these for like a certain term, and then you can go do something else. You get term skills. If you take it again, you get other skills. Very typical in a life path system. Federal law enforcement, environmentalist, and entertainment. You can just see. And you keep going. There's a lot. And I think it's interesting, like Call of Cthulhu has a lot of occupations, like you can be like a librarian and stuff like that. What's interesting about a life path system is that it doesn't have to define you. So if you take like psychic test subject, psychiatrist, so you can take like public employee and get some decent skills, but then you say you're a public employee after you discharge from the military, then you can sort of round out your character a little bit better. If you know what I mean, like if you need a little bit of oomph in the combat, you can sort of shape your character a little bit into maybe being a bit of a jack of all trades. I don't know if it plays like that in practice, but in theory, that's how I've always felt about like life path systems and why I thought they were interesting. They give you sort of like a synopsis here at the end. Task resolution is what I was basically saying. There is empathic difficulty levels. It's a sort of a different power level. Again, like the specifics of it are not, I'm not going to sit here and go through every single thing, but what's interesting is it's the setting, right? And I don't want to go into the setting too much because it even says like, hey, if you're a player, don't read up to a certain point, let it be a mystery. But the dark times are basically talking about how, there's like the metroplexes, the purple areas here. They're going to be like the cyberpunk settings. The outlaw is very much like the Mad Max. And then the demon grounds are the hot spots for the things that are going on. This is the image here that for some reason really captured my imagination and what this game was about. It's, sort of when we played it, we stuck to the metroplexes. So it was very much like a X-Files meets cyberpunk meets horror. And it was the first game like this that I played, and it surprised me. I gotta say, it really surprised me because I never thought of myself. I think I played this before I watched the X-Files, so I didn't know that I could sort of be a fan of some of this stuff. And it's for all intents and purposes, it's a very typical, like, governments have declined, corporations have taken over, it's everything you kind of expect from like a classic cyberpunk dystopian future kind of. I even think like cyberpunk, once you get outside of the cities, are very much in tune with what this is giving you, sort of a little bit more of the Wild West, Mad Max, yada yada. So I thought it was an interesting spin on because I think the trick I have with cyberpunk, and I've only played it a couple of times, is I kind of struggle trying to figure out what, like, long term, what kind of stories as say a game master would I tell. Because it's going to be like a conspiracy involving a corporation and political malfeasance and intrigue, But here it can go off the hook and start there, but get really weird. So I feel like, was this something that Patrick and I were talking about in our last Damn Fine Coffee? Or was this something that came up? The idea of like, games, every game genre seems to have like some horror version of it, like even like Cold War Spy. Like one of the ones I looked at to run my game was like a really interesting game, and also you fought demons or something to that effect, and you're kind of like, oh, that seems to be every single genre has the, and you add weird to it. Here I felt like, and I think part of that discussion was like, but why not? It opens up possibilities. It doesn't cost you anything if you want to leave it out. Or you can find a version of it that doesn't have it. But here I think it was interesting because then it just seemed like a nice mix of like, yeah, you're doing corporate malfeasance and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden fucking tentacles reach out from the alley and try and pull you in. It added something that I thought, and it's a kind of, I feel like there's something to this kind of horror where it's out of your control. It's more powerful than you, and it dictates the path of your life, which parallels like the corporation conspiracies in cyberpunk kind of games. And so I felt like that was a nice mix. Like when you pair it into like Cold War Spy, like thematically, they feel like two different things that you could argue taste great together, but they're two different things. Here, I feel like the type of horror you're experiencing shares similarities with the type of power that these kinds of games give government conspiracies and corporate conspiracies. So that's, I think, another reason why I thought they blended decently together. One of the things I want to, so like I said, I don't want to go too much into the setting just because they say like, hey, if you want to play this game, let it be a surprise, let it be a mystery. And then the game masters, you keep reading so you know a little bit more of what's going on and you can sort of shape it. The thing I think about this game that is interesting, but I'm curious about the remake. And we'll probably touch on that, towards the end a little bit. But like I said, this is based on Twilight 2000. Twilight 2000 is a very tactical, crunchy, at least the first, second editions. And I'm surprised how tactical and crunchy the Free League version is. Like, for a company that makes dice pool games that are not pure narrative games, but are not, don't have to be super intense. Twilight 2000, I feel like, pushes it in an interesting way. This game basically takes Twilight 2000's combat and then brings it over to this setting. In my mind, at the time as a kid, playing Twilight 2000 a lot, I was like, hell yeah. But I don't think you need the detail of this combat system in this kind of game, like sort of a horror, it's going to be more focused on the story. I'm trying to see how many pages. Yeah, it's almost 50 pages. I don't know. It's a lot of pages are dedicated to combat. You got like the type of action you take, fire, aim. Like this is one of those cases where I feel like the more streamlined Free League system would definitely do the job because it's not about hardcore turn actions. You have 6 phases, and if your initiative is a 6, you go. Phase 5, and 6 go, and you get potentially up to 6 actions per. Like, I don't think you need that much crunch. I think panic would be important, but you're getting like opportunity fire. You're getting, hit locations I personally like, but it does add something to it. There's more cruft that you have to deal with. Aimed attacks, hit locations, armor, section that's, melee combat, fire combat, using scopes, laser sights, you can recoil. You can just sort of see like all of this could make sense in Twilight 2000, like detailed rules on automatic fire, moving in fire, tracking ammunition down to the round, direct fire, deviation, and direct fire. So you're talking like artillery, or like hand grenades, or, chemical grenades, chemical rounds. Shotguns having their own rules is pretty typical. Burst diagrams of 28-meter bursts, this is classic ass Twilight 2000. Concussion damage is C equals 5 times the square root of damage points. So, like, again, in Twilight 2000, where the the military combat is the thing, it makes sense. But this was just like, I don't know why they just took that Twilight 2000 whole cloth and dumped it into this kind of horror setting. It ends up being, in my mind, too much for what the game is trying to do. And it distracts from, in my mind, what I want these games to be is like story driven, like I said, X-Files, horror, cyberpunk. And so I want to know, as I always do, like what happens next? Where is this going? Just what the hell's going on here? But then if you're stopping for like 45 seconds to do a 28-meter burst explosion and then calculate concussion and damage points separately or whatever, you're just like, oh my God, like I just hand wave this. I just need to know what happens next. So that was always one thing that jumped out at me as I was back in the day, again, maybe less so, but as I've looked at it over the years since, because it's always been one in the back of my head that I'm like, oh man, I would love to get the concept of this setting, of the driver of this game. That idea I think is really cool. And slap around saboted light armor pierce, like you don't need like this level of detail. Again, in Twilight 2000, it's part of the fun. Here, it's in the way of what's really important, which is the atmosphere, the weird, the horror, and the conspiracies. Burns, explosions, wounds and healing, wound severity. I think there's even rules like operating aircraft, vehicle combat. This is, sort of including these. Boat damage. Do you need, again, turreted vehicle damage? This is all good if it's Twilight 2000 and you're in like a T-72. But if you are driving like a Nissan through the Demon Grounds, like I don't know if you need this level of detail. Boat damage. Now, at the same time, having said all that, collision damage, aerospace craft damage, like are you flying in space travel? Like what are we doing? So, but what makes it interesting though, as much as I'm sitting here saying, what are we doing? It does provide you the template to like tell this kind of story in just about any kind of cyberpunky setting, right? Because doesn't like part of the book Neuromancer take place in space stations and stuff like that? So like obviously this stuff is important. Do you need to have like intercept pie charts to figure out the difficulty of intercept? Do you need like vector-based intercept modeling? I don't know, but it's there if you want it. It gives you a nice robot damage. I'm going to stop there because I'm going to stop before the referee section. I don't want to get into the referee section because, again, if the core idea grabs you, either wait for the remake that's coming out or grab PDFs. I think I've seen Humble Bundle deals on Dark Conspiracy PDFs, so you can definitely get them without, working too hard or potentially spending a lot of money. I don't know if the Humble Bundle deals are still up as I'm recording this, but I've definitely grabbed some. But yeah, so like it's hard for me to say, like, I like the idea that it includes all of those options. Like it's got space, it's got vehicle, like you sort of are going to need all that. Like if you're driving like a Mad Max style, vehicle with like, jury rigged armor plates and spikes and bullshit, you might need rules for how to deal with combat vehicle to vehicle now. And maybe these are too much. Maybe they're actually exactly what you need. But that was always the one thing that sort of jumped out at me as I've sort of looked at it again, was, taking Twilight 2000's stuff whole cloth sometimes and just dropping it in here. It felt like it might have been overkill. But what do I know? So again, like the core rulebook, basically covers everything you have. It's a 1d10 roll low system, where your skills and stats and whatever are helping determine target numbers. And then if the task is difficult, you'll take that like target number and cut it in half or whatever, round fractions down. It's that kind of thing. Combat is very detailed if you want it. What I think could be interesting is the setting itself, like just take inspiration from that. And then, you could run it in liminal horror. You could run it you could run it in games that are, you could potentially run it in Blade Runner. You could find games that cover some of the basic mechanics, the spectrum of basic mechanics that Dark Conspiracy covers, and then just take the setting for inspiration, or, go all in, and go for it. What I'll also say, as far as the say like the combat mechanics maybe being too much, I do like the character creation, which is a life path, which is also going to be sort of too much in a sense. If you just say like a free league where you pick 4 things and gives you sort of an overview and you're good to go. I really like the detail of like charting a path, and even if you then don't turn that into like a 3-paragraph narrative of your character's backstory, it does sort of give you an idea, at least as the player, of who this person is and who you're sort of shaping them to be. I will say the without getting into spoilers, the horror element of this, like the options you have for the horror element are sort of, I'm of two minds. In one mind, I feel like it does not have a point of view. It's but at the same time, the good point is, if you wanted to, you could pick and choose the type of horror you want the looming shadows to be and go for it. It covers a wide spectrum, more like just throwing everything against the wall to see what sticks, which again gives you as the GM the power to see what sticks, to decide what sticks. But if you're coming into it looking for guidance on some level of what's going on behind the scenes, the options are I think a little too broad to give you that specific perspective. The dark conspiracy behind this, I think it says it early in the game, is that it's basically like it's an otherworldly evil presence that has been allowed to, I think it says this pretty early on. It's a meh that has come about and fed off of the suffering in society. And where it goes from there is part of blah, blah, blah. But I think it says that very early in the book, like this is, and things are starting. And I like that idea again, because, going into what I was saying earlier about it parallels the evils of like the government conspiracies and the political and the corporate conspiracies, which, at least some of the government conspiracies I thought would be a little better hidden in real life, but they're not. They're just like, here's what we're doing. And everybody's like, I'm not happy about that. And then it happens anyway. That doesn't really feel like a conspiracy theory. That feels like a Three Stooges kick to the nuts. And we're all just like, I guess we're going to take this. And I don't quite understand why, but, God damn it. Can we just get better conspiracies? Like, we deserve better. Anyway. But yeah, so I will say that about like the horror is that it does land pretty broad, but you could say that gives you more options. So, and maybe that's good, because in the end of the game, like, I do appreciate when games give you the wiggle room to sort of make it your own, like sort of shape the types of stories you want to tell instead of having the story sort of shoved down your throat. But so this is, we're going to keep going. This is definitely not like, I don't have every book ever made, but I'll go into some of the other books just so you can see the types of things that came out with the original edition and might inform you what's coming with the new Mongoose section. So that's the rule book. It's, again, it's not a hard rule set. The combat is a lot. If my memory serves from like 2000, it's a lot, but you do get used to it. And, the things like when you're calculating concussion points, it's not something that happens very often. So even though it might be a little more detailed or cumbersome than you want, it's not something that comes up all the time. So it's not a big deal, and you just get it done and move on. And sometimes it can be fun when you're like, when we played the old Car Wars game, some of those mechanics were a little batshit, where the minutia you'd get into as you sort of took a turn, lost control and flipped, all of a sudden like the car, on a roll bounces and ends up going 28 feet in the air. Like, figuring out the little details sometimes can be hilarious when it becomes absurd. So maybe that also kicks in here. I don't know. But yeah, let's go into some of the other books that I have grabbed over the years. These are not my originals. Much like Middle Earth Role Playing, if you watch that Bookhouse Boys I did, I kind of grab things as I go. Sometimes I just sort of, I just grab them as I go. So Dark Conspiracy, we'll get that out of the way. Again, I'm not going to open up some of these, and you'll see why in a second. I got the booster kit. The booster kit is like a little bit of a Game Master screen that, as you can see, updates it to the D20 system. This is what I was talking about with Twilight 2000 when they tweaked it. This booster kit does the same for Dark Conspiracy, just to keep the versions together. So this becomes like Dark Conspiracy 2.5. And you can see like the numbers, we showed this table earlier and these numbers were lower. Now they're, I don't know if they're doubled literally, but okay, you can see the task of it like ×4, ×2. It just basically gets everything going to a D20 scale instead of the D20 scale, and just double the recoil rating. It's just making it so you can play it with a D20. This gave you a couple of extra careers: biker, renegade, ET, rogue android, street urchin. It tweaked existing careers. Contacts, I thought that was part of the original rules, but maybe it expands on it. Some errata, that I think that might have been why I got it. And then of course it talks about the D20 system if you want to do that. And if you don't, it's not a big deal. Because again, I don't know if it matters too much, but yeah, I remember I did grab this because I wanted some of the errata. I think that might have been the main thing at the time. Anything dealing with like the evils and the stuff is like dark, like the dark stuff. So like you have dark tech, which is, much like in say like Traveler games where you have like the biopod kind of gear. Here, obviously as the darkness sort of bleeds into our reality, there's going to be a merging of different things. And so this book, again, I won't go into too much, sort of goes into that, like how like evilness merges with equipment, technology, and how you can incorporate that into your games and the types of things you can do. Let me see if it, again, I don't want to, it's got biologic devices, electronic devices, vehicles, consumer goods, miscellaneous equipment. So yeah, it's basically, this is an equipment book, but it's sort of, again, skewed toward incorporating, the dark tech, obviously, into your setting. So you don't have to figure it out if you don't want to. Another one I have is the Dark Races. So consider this like, it's not just a monster manual of sorts. Maybe it is. But yeah, so again, it's a monster manual that lets, just gives you like, dozens of new things you can have your players run into and encounter. Again, it might be cool just to have it. Maybe you don't need it. Another one I have is the Empathic Sourcebook. Now, the Empathic Sourcebook also is a D20 introduction. It describes different type of empathies. You've got neuropathy, psionics, sorcery, mysticism. Gives you new careers. So it lets you really build out a new type of character. Which is a little more, you can almost say magic-y, which on some levels makes sense for the setting. Like, again, as all this cosmic evil horror kind of stuff bleeds into our world, like, obviously it's going to impact the fabric of reality, I guess you could say. So that's what this book is. I also have a Proto-Dimensions. Now, Proto-Dimensions, gives you, there was a map, but it gives you like, how can you cross into other dimensions? Like what's in between the spaces? What are different forms of travel? What are some of the devices that can do that? How do you use proto-dimensions in campaign? They give you a kind of a list of different ones here and some details and breakdowns of those. Again, I won't go into them too much. You can pause if you want to really spoil it. And then finally, Heart of Darkness is a campaign for Dark Conspiracy. Maybe it's crack at like Masks and Nyarlathotep or something. It's like the global globe hopping, conspiracy where you're going to different things around the world and mysticism. And anyway, and there's a global mystery that's going to spell bad things for the planet if you don't solve the issues and yada, yada, yada. But it's sort of like Dark Conspiracy's take at like one of those grand Cthulhu adventures that have you go everywhere, run into interesting people, solve mysteries and puzzles in exotic locations, and it gets all mystical and weird. And yeah, the Heart of Darkness, I think, is an item you can see for 1,000 years. The Dark Lady, a sorceress of ancient Baghdad, is laying in mystical stasis. A hideous race of parasites has chafed at the wards, barring them from Earth, and is trying to aid the Dark Lady. The servants of the Dark Lady have sought to destroy the mystical opal called the Heart of Darkness to release her. And the brothers of Ahmad have dogged the heels of the servants, seeking the knowledge to destroy the Dark Lady once for all. So, yeah, again, like a millennia spanning battle between a particular source of evil, source of good. You can almost see it like the in the third Indiana Jones movie. There's the people racing to find the Holy Grail, but then there's the people, in Venice that try and prevent, like the famous line is like, "I'm prepared to die, Dr. Jones, or you," to protect the secrets of the Holy Grail. It's sort of like that. What I think this I grabbed because again, there is a starting adventure in the core rulebook. And what's funny about it, like I'm always curious, like what's a starting adventure? Because it gives you an idea of what they might be thinking, like some authorial intent, right? And this one, what I always found funny was it takes place in Dayton, Ohio. And it sort of has like a scene one, the dream. And the dream is like, I need you to get on the railroad and go to Dayton, Ohio, like the narrative railroad. I thought it was, it's a kind of a small little simple story. I do really like it. I think it sets the tone very well. I think based on what happens in the story, there's no reason why it has to take place in Dayton, Ohio. And it also, what I always thought was interesting about that is that in my mind, you have this sort of instigating event, and then you're like, I need to get to Dayton, Ohio. And then you have to cross from whatever metroplex you're in through no man's land and the Wild West and Mad Max to get to Dayton, Ohio to then explore this mystery. I didn't see my characters as like the country hopping. Like if it were the X-Files, yeah, Scully and Mulder would be flown to Dayton, Ohio to investigate the stories that are coming out of XYZ's field office. I didn't really think that's what Dark Conspiracy was. And so I think if I were ever going to run it, I probably would just be like, where are you guys? And then because the events of the story are not specific, not necessarily specific to Dayton, Ohio, I think I would just adapt it to whatever. But it is a cool little story. And I wanted to have Heart of Darkness because, I wanted to see like, what is it? Like if they're going to go all in on an adventure, what kind of story are they going to tell? And it, again, it's kind of like a classic ass Cthulhu, Call of Cthulhu kind of globe hopping conspiracy mystery, whatever. So I appreciated being able to see that. Now, I showed you these books. Let me start with the Proto Dimensions and the Dark Races and the Dark Tech. I think these books hold value. Well, you know what? Let me sort of, these books here. I have these books, but my intention would be to, obviously, Dark Races, Proto Dimensions, and Dark Tech. Like, I would never let my players look at those because, again, I'm trying to keep everything sort of a bit of a mystery. The Empathic Source book, I also would never use at the beginning. Like maybe this is the thing that keeps the game interesting for players that have had multiple characters and we're in our like third campaign and they don't want to do the exact same thing. But what I've always had trouble with the psionics and stuff like that, I always feel like my character is too powerful in weird ways. It's one thing to have an overpowered weapon, And it's another thing to have like magic in settings that aren't necessarily. You can argue that with all the dark races and the horror and the whatever, there is like a mystical, magical element to it, but not for the players. For the players, it's supposed to be a mystery and it's supposed to be overwhelming and it's supposed to feel like this force that you can't crack, and it should feel overwhelming. And not necessarily that the point of this game is to get overwhelmed and die like you do in Cthulhu and some other kinds of cosmic horror. But I feel like this sort of like makes the setting less like there's a wall between the players, a mysterious wall between the players and the setting. Things like this sort of break down or help them get over the wall or whatever, however you want to torture that metaphor more than I already am. And so, but I could also see like, after you've cracked some of the code and you've already experienced some of what's going on behind the scenes, maybe this helps keep it interesting going forward, yeah, who knows? But if I were to run this, I would absolutely take this off the table, especially early on. Now, these 3 books I see purely as GM resources if I were to run it. Obviously, Dark Races and Proto Dimensions, it's clearly intended to be that way because, that's, it's just a whole list of stuff for GMs to throw in front of their players. So obviously like that, but even the dark tech, like I would use this, like I wouldn't let shopping in this book be part of character creation. This would be sort of, I just like having like a list of resources of things that I could pull out. Like if, the weird thing they've been chasing the whole adventure, suddenly has like a weird blade, I might pull it from dark tech, or I'd make it up myself. But I see this very much as like all of these things are very much a GM resource because of the nature of the setup where it's like, hey, players stop here, GMs keep going. I sort of see that philosophy extending to a lot of the source books. So that's sort of how I take that. Now, as I was saying in the beginning, Mongoose has gotten the rights to republish it. And of course, they're known for the most recent version of Traveler. Now, Traveler, Dark Conspiracy, Twilight 2000, they all come from the same company, Games Designer Workshop, GDW. I think this is a good potential mix for the reboot because it's got obviously the life path system already sort of built into the mechanics, so you don't have to worry about that. It's got the same idea for task resolution where, at least with this second edition, where you sort of take a couple different things and that's giving you sort of a target number, and then you're trying to beat the target number. Depending on how much you beat it or lose to it determines critical success or failure. This game sort of has, again, like it's got like the in-depth character creation, which I think fits nicely. You could sort of tailor, the life paths in there to what's already here. It's got like what I think might be a challenge to this game. And again, it might not be a challenge at all. It might be what, people want, is this game can be also quite crunchy in terms of like combat and things like that. Vehicles, space combat, blah, blah, blah. It can get pretty heavy. And so you don't have to skimp on that aspect of the game. So it might not solve that problem if you're seeing that as a problem, like it's too mechanics heavy and it gets in the way of like really interesting stories. And I just want to find out what happens next. But if you're like, no, I wanted to keep, the intended spirit of the original. I feel like the 2d6 system that, Mongoose has here with Traveler, which is very much based on, GDW's original Traveler, I think it does the trick. It's got crunchiness for radiation. It's got, it's got a lot of, and then like the things, you see here, like traits of creatures, alarm, amphibious armor. You could start turning this kind of idea into things that are more horror themed, because the difference between aliens and horror sometimes not that different. Just ask Ridley Scott. So yeah, it's, I feel like in the end, it's a very detailed equipment. Again, it gets into a lot of the minutia of combat that Dark Conspiracy, Twilight 2000 oeuvre does, because it all sort of comes from a similar place back at GDW. So that makes me very curious to see what they do with Dark Conspiracy, because in the end, I feel like what I was just saying, I think they're going to really capture the spirit of the game with a rule set that feels like a lateral move in some ways, in a good way. It's going to be probably a little too crunchy for what it needs to be, but that I think honors the legacy of the original more than turning it into like a PBTA style Forged in the Dark, Brimblewood Bay, whatever. Like that wouldn't be honoring the original's intent, so to speak, where I feel like this absolutely could. So yeah, at the end of the day, like I said, like I'm really looking forward to the Dark Conspiracy remake, seeing what they do with it, seeing how it comes together, seeing how much they leave intact compared to how much they update. Because if you have the chance to modernize it, you might take some time to modernize it. But I'll be curious to see where they go with it, and I'm really looking forward to it. Mongoose, as much as I don't get into Traveler, I have the core rulebook, because this is the core rulebook you need for the 2300 AD line. What I was about to say is, as much as I don't get into Traveler, I really do get into a lot of the things that they do on the side. 2300 AD, Dark Conspiracy, the new Kickstarter that was last year, I don't know how many months ago, Pioneer, which is sort of like Zozer Game. I think it's Zozer Games. They have like a 2100 AD. It's basically Pioneer is like, even like 2300 is like our mankind or humankind's jump to interstellar space. Pioneer, I feel like, is our launch into the solar system and starting to head towards our expanse kind of future. Dark Conspiracy, I thought I heard that they even got, and I don't know how this is going to work, but I heard they even got the rights to redo a version of Twilight 2000. So I don't know if they're going to make a version that is sort of, and I think they all these things are taking their 2D6 core mechanic and applying it to these other settings. And again, because where Twilight 2000, where these games ended up with, at least their 1D10, not that different in some ways mechanically, so it feels like a good fit. But yeah, so I'm really curious to see what Mongoose does with everything except for Traveler. So we'll end it there. Anyway, Dark Conspiracy, I'm a big fan. Again, part of it is nostalgia, because it was the game that introduced this kind of horror mystery that I didn't know I was looking for. Dark Conspiracy is the game that showed me the light. So yeah. If this was interesting to you, definitely keep an eye out for the Kickstarter. I think it's a Kickstarter coming out over the summer. The time I'm recording this, it might be a couple months out. But maybe if this pops up in your feed years from now, the Kickstarter is out and you can go grab the books right off the shelf. But there we go. So thanks again for checking this out. Hopefully we'll be back to normal soon. There's been a lot going on, some personal things on my front, and everybody's busy. But hopefully we can get back to some Pathfinder soon. That's why I didn't do a Hostile solos, because there's some stuff going on here, and that takes a little more time and energy. So anyway, mainly we're a tabletop actual play RPG podcast, Black Lodge Trivia Night. If you prefer audio versions of this kind of stuff, just search for that wherever you get your podcasts. We should show up. We mainly, at the time of this recording, we're playing Pathfinder 2nd Edition Season of Ghosts. We've had 4 sessions so far. It might not be going well. I tend to roll very poorly and nearly die almost every time, except for the last session, but I managed to avoid it then. But but it's been great otherwise. And so hopefully we're going to get that going again. keep going with that and see where it goes. We have a Discord if you are into that kind of thing. You want to jump in, talk about RPGs or CRPGs, because obviously there's CRPGs up on the channel as well. Skyrim's going up. Lord of the Rings is going up again at the time of this recording. But yeah, mainly we are a tabletop RPG actual play channel podcast. So it's always great when the three of us can get on camera and do the thing that we really are all here to do. So hopefully that'll be back soon. Hope you're doing well. Thanks again. Take care. Bye-bye.